Hello, and welcome to the 2016 Dynamic Range Day broadcast. Thank you for joining me. I can see we have people from all over the world who are listening in this evening. I'm going to announce the winner of the Dynamic Range Day award, and I'm very pleased to be able to play you an interview with the engineer who mastered that album, which I think you're going to find very interesting. In fact, it's only excerpts from the interview, but I will put the whole interview on my podcast, I think, next week. I will also announce the competition winners. We've had a fantastic competition this year, loads of great prizes, and I'm going to do a little demonstration for you, or a little presentation, talking about why, well, briefly, why the name Dynamic Range Day is not a great name, and then following on from that, a discussion of why dynamics are not necessarily what we think they are and why that's important. So first of all, let's announce the winner of the award, because as I say, I have this great piece of interview that I can play to you, talking with the engineer about the mastering decisions and the creative decisions that went into that album. Before I do that, I will give you an idea of some of the other albums that were up for consideration this year. There have been some great dynamic records in all kinds of genres. The Plastic Man album, EX, sounds great. The Anchorus novel album, Confessions of a Romance Novelist. I read novelist off the screen and wanted to say her novel. It's an album, not a novel. The Kendrick Lamar album, which is actually called, I think, something like Unmixed, Unmastered, sounds pretty good to me, even though he says it hasn't been mastered. And if that's what happens when he doesn't master his albums, I would recommend that's the way that he goes in general. You know, that's a slippery slope. There are other acts like Iron Maiden who maybe haven't had such good results that way. But yeah, ironically, in terms of dynamics, that album really sounded pretty good. The Seal album, 7, which was mastered by my great friend and old colleague Nick Watson at Fluid Mastering, sounds amazing. I mean, you would expect it to. It's a Trevor Horn production, and the dynamics on that record are absolutely in my sweet spot, which is just a pleasure to hear. And yet again, last year's winner, Stephen Wilson, has produced a great sounding dynamic album. Actually, he kind of calls it I don't think he calls it a proper album release. I think it's because it's made up of some outtakes from previous albums. So it's kind of halfway between his albums, but still great songs, still great sound. 4.5 is a fantastic sounding record. And I feel a little bit bad this year because, as regular supporters of Dynamic Range Day will know, this year's event is slightly late. Normally I hold it at the end of March, and I've had to push it back for personal reasons into May this year. And the winner of this year's award actually released their album only a couple of weeks ago. So they wouldn't have won this year's award if Dynamic Range Day had been at the normal time. And I thought hard about it, but it's such a great sounding album, and it's such a big release that I felt it had to be the winner. But that means that Silence in the Snow by Trivium, which is a fantastic sounding metal album, suggested by Alex at Metalfy, the Metalfy website, don't quite make it to win the award this year. I feel bad about that, except that Stephen Wilson won last year. I know he's not really metal, but there are some, there are definitely metal influences in his sound and in his past. So, I mean, it's a fascinating paradox that metal fans tend to be so passionate about the sound of their music, given that some, at least, of that music is extremely aggressive, extremely distorted, and, can sound quite, is meant to sound quite unpleasant sometimes. But on the other end of the spectrum, you have just some of the most amazing sounding records out there. So, I really think that metal is a genre that deserves to be recognized for what it does in terms of sound quality and in terms of dynamics. And any metal fans out there who aren't reading the Metalfy website to get the information they're giving you there about whether the albums sound good or not, I highly recommend you head over there. So commiserations to Trivium for that, but I hope the kind of the big plug I gave them there helps go some way towards that. People who've been reading my blog won't be surprised to learn that the real winner this year is James Blake for his new album, and I've temporarily forgotten the title of it. Let me find it just so that you guys know. I mean, I've written a blog post about it, which goes into why I think it sounds so great. I mean, it's quite a mellow album. It's not an aggressive sounding album, but it does have some really big, loud moments on it. And The Colour in Anything, there's the title for you. It's just everything that I'm hoping for. It's like Daft Punk's album. It's like Uptown Funk. It's like Pharrell's releases. The dynamics, I mean, there are albums with even wider dynamic range, but you can tell the care and attention that's gone into the sound of this album. And I think I will now stop talking and play you the interview that I had with the engineer who mixed and mastered the album, Matt Colton from Alchemy Mastering in London. This is about 10 minutes long. I think you guys will find it very interesting and very heartening to hear. I know everybody watching this podcast cares about this issue the same way that I do. I had hoped to have a graphic to put on screen so that you had something interesting to look at while it was playing, but instead I will share my screen and show you the Wikipedia page for Matt. Alchemy are currently having their website redesigned, so I'm not able to show you their studios right now, but I can at least show you something while you're listening to the interview. So let me get the audio playing here, and then I will switch over. Matt, hi, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks. How are you doing?
I'm very good, thank you. And you know now the reason I'm calling you is because this album by James Blake has won the Dynamic Range Day Award 2016, and you were the mastering engineer on that. So congratulations for your part in that.
Well, thank you very much. And that's fantastic. That's wonderful. Thank you very much.
Yeah, well, and I don't know how much contact you have with James, but maybe if you can pass on the message to him, let him know. That might be fun for him to know as well.
Yeah, no, I absolutely will. Not least because the dynamic range was driven, very much by him. It was, at his insistence on making this album very, very dynamic. It was part of his kind of vision for the record. So I think, not trying to speak for him, but I'm sure he will be, delighted to know that. I mean, he wanted it that way for himself, for his own listening pleasure, as well as him thinking it was the best way to communicate his ideas. And the fact that people like yourself have kind of, it's obviously worked. Basically, it resonates with people like yourself. So I'm sure he'll be delighted, because it was fully intentional and part of his kind of artistic vision, if you like. So I absolutely will be, I'll speak to him in the next couple of days and let him know.
That's brilliant. And I mean, it's the risk of being hideously corny. That is literally music to my ears, because, that's the kind of thing we want to hear, is that, artists understand the benefits of going for a more dynamic sound and kind of follow that through. Was that something that was new on this album? Had he been moving in that direction anyway? Because the previous album it wasn't stupid loud, but it was somewhat louder, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I don't know if you listened to the first album. The first album's really loud, so I guess it was conscious in my mind, because basically when I tried to make it as loud as the first one, it just killed the record. It got to the point. James had said, "What's the point of the loudness? Literally, like, what? I don't understand. If we don't like the way it sounds, then why?
Yeah, exactly.
The guy who was assisting him sort of, in terms of being on Spotify, on the radio, competing with other things, and James was just like, I'm just not interested. These words just that sentence means nothing to me. It's completely irrelevant.
Well, and of course, it doesn't work either. That's the thing. Everybody thinks that you need to do it in order for Spotify and radio, but those are exactly the places where being super loud in the first place won't help. You'll end up getting averaged out to be the same as everything else.
Yeah, exactly. No, I mean, this is the thing. So, following on from that conversation, I spoke with his manager, and we had a similar conversation. He said, are we going to be penalised in some way, in terms of when people are listening? And I said exactly what you've just said. Now because of R128 and all the other things, the sort of the whole, he was familiar with Soundcheck on iTunes, which was how I sort of explained it to him. It's like, this is kind of happening across the board, this averaging out. And if you listen to a radio station now in the UK or in Europe, a digital radio station, and they're playing music from different decades. You listen, you hear the stuff, something that was done sort of mid-80s or something that was done, early 90s, which is then followed by a contemporary recording, and it's horrific. You just sort of, you hang your head in shame and think, well, how have we gone so far backwards? I mean, where's the snare drum gone and everything, and all the rest of it. So, his management, was then like, okay, well, then why? Let's just make it as dynamic as James wants, Now,
that is so great to hear, and for several reasons. I mean, because one thing is, of course, I'm talking to you, and obviously the person responsible ultimately for the sound of the record is James. So in a way, the award is for him. But actually, that conversation there, you just earned the award for yourself, right? Because, that still takes guts. When somebody says, are we going to be penalised? To be able to look them metaphorically in the eye and say no, there's a lot of people who will back away from that. They'll start to kind of fudge and hedge their bets and all the rest of it. And I think, it's great that you felt able to say that and that they accepted it, that his manager kind of, believed you and went with it and went with James's vision, because that's how we get progress in all of this. The more albums like this and Random Access Memories by Daft Punk and, Uptown Funk and all of these kind of more dynamic songs, the more of them make it out into the real world and are successful even so, that's where the proof comes from. That's where, that's how more people will kind of start to take the leap.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one thing that really struck me, and in fact, it was on the track with Bonnie Bear, I Need a Forest Fire. Originally we had a more compressed version of that, which I really liked. It had a kind of a body to it. It had a sort of solidity. And I've been listening to it in the car, and it's a great track. It's a wonderful piece of music. It's great vocals and lovely hooks, and it's obviously one of the high points of the record. And I really felt that we'd cracked it. And then we decided to sort of back the limiting off. I think we took about 2.5 dB off the gain on the limiter. So it's really just a tickle of limiting, which is the version that's on the album. And I just put that on in the car, and I was just driving around sort of late at night, and just just stuck it on, and I was stunned at how much there were backing vocals that I hadn't heard before. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
There was things going on, and there's quite a lot of stereo in the vocals on that track. Not panning, but sort of kind of broad stereo and that kind of thing. And it all just appeared, and there was so much that I hadn't heard, because the sort of the dynamic reduction that we had smushed everything together, and yes, we'd kind of got some more body into the track by bringing up those, bringing the average level up, if you like, bringing up the sort of lower, quieter bits, but it just meant that we lost definition on something that it turns out was like of fundamental importance. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it was like a light bulb moment. At that point, we kind of set the dynamics for the album, or this kind of overall loudness, I should say. It was that kind of defined it, because it's like, oh, okay, right, yeah, that's what we're doing, and that's the record that we're making.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that I'm so pleased about, is that actually, because I'm hoping that this will get lots more publicity and people will talk about this, and maybe it'll be another landmark album in the sort of the process. That's my hope. Maybe I'm just being kind of pipe dreaming, but if that happens, I'm pretty sure some people are going to come back and go, yeah, but it's a quiet record. It's an atmospheric record. It's meant to be quiet. It's not meant to be that loud. And I mean, I kind of have two replies to that. I mean, one, yes, that's right, but the loud moments are really loud.
Yeah.
So yeah, that the big moments aren't held back. It's not, and there are some big moments on there, even though overall it's quite mellow and it's quite chilled out and atmospheric. But the kind of the paradox about that is actually it would have been quite easy technically to make it 2 or 3 dBs louder. And most people, like you, when you had that louder version, you wouldn't know what was missing. You only know that when you hear when it's given that extra little bit of space to breathe. Suddenly that's when it kind of leaps out at you, and I know exactly what you mean. It's part of that 3-dimensionality thing.
If it's done well and if it's a good recording, you will get front to back, and you will get a sense of depth in the audio, and obviously that is what you lose or erode with the more compression that you have, and this particular record is a great example of that. I mean, I liked your comment, which I completely agree with, which is after you've been listening for 5 minutes, you go to the volume control and you turn it up because you're engaged and you're enjoying it, and you want more, and the good thing is you turn it up and it doesn't get hard, or it doesn't get brittle, it doesn't get fatiguing, because it's not, just sort of 8K square waves, being drilled into your brain.
Yeah, it just gets better. It's that kind of weird thing of, all of this is supposed to have happened because louder is better, but it's louder at the volume control, not in the file, not in the digits.
Yeah, well, it's because everything's got louder, but the dynamic ratio is unchanged because you turn up the amplifier. You haven't had to sort of artificially raise the average level to make it feel louder.
Well, I mean, let's keep our fingers crossed that that's the way that it's going to go, because and thank you and James for kind of playing a part in that. Who knows? Maybe it could be quite a big part. I think this record deserves to be hugely successful. I hope it will be.
Yes, yeah, me too.
And
me too.
Let's hope that the trend continues in future. So, thank you so much for talking to me today.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
And congratulations on the album. The award is just one of those things, but it's a fantastic thing. I think you should be really, really proud of it. And just for anybody listening, you work at Alchemy Mastering, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So anybody who wants to find out more about you and what you've done, is it alchemymastering.com?
It is indeed.
Yeah, and everybody head over to alchemymastering.com, check out Matt, check out his track records. So yeah, like I say, congratulations again, and thank you so much for talking to me.
No, my pleasure. No, thank you very much.
So there you go. I hope you enjoyed listening to that as much as I enjoyed doing the interview. That's actually the edited highlights, specifically relating to, well, I picked all the juicy stuff for you guys to hear. You know, I love that story of him going to the record company and them agreeing and letting him go with a more dynamic release. The whole interview lasted about an hour, and there's loads of stuff in there that I think people who are interested in mastering and are curious about the loudness wars in general will like. So I am going to edit that properly, and I will release it as hopefully the next episode of my podcast, which you can find at themasteringshow.com. So head on over there. Just before I go back to, so that you can see my face again, the graphic that I've had here on screen for the last half of that interview, you can just see those are readings with my Dynameter plugin, which measure the PSR, which is like the DR that the TT meter measures, but as a graph over time. So those are, and these are different analyses of 3 different albums, and hopefully you can read it. But so the one on the left is the latest Radiohead album, A Moon-Shaped Pool, which gets down to PSR 3 at some points, which is roughly equivalent to DR3. So most of you will know how squashed that is. And typically, for a lot of the time, it's down at PSR 6, which is DR6, which I don't think is enough loudness space to sound good. I'm not saying it sounds bad, but my instinct, and I've never been wrong about this when I've had the chance to hear the original files and compare them, is that it would have sounded so much better with more dynamics. The album in the middle is the new Drake album, which is surprisingly dynamic for music in the urban genre. You can see there's 2 or 3 songs there which are still pretty heavily squashed, but it only goes down to a minimum of PSR 6, DR6, and most of it is, I guess, looking at that, PSR 8 or 9, DR 8 or 9. So again, great sounding albums. And then on the right, you can see The Color in Anything, which, you know, I think just looking at those graphs shows you it has to be the clear winner this year, because, you know, it's such a mainstream release. I'm really hopeful it will be a huge success. And not only does it measure well, it sounds fantastic. So I hope you agree with me that was a very worthy winner. Let's click back. Hopefully you can see me again now. Before I go into my little demonstration of some of the nerdy details of dynamics and the loudness war, I'd like to ask you just to take a moment to post out a link to this webinar or to the Dynamic Range Day site in your social media streams. Post it to this webinar. Invite people to come and take a look. You can say it's going to be a little bit nerdy, but hopefully some of them will like that. Just to help spread the word about this. I'd appreciate that. So I said I was going to tell you why I think Dynamic Range Day is not a great name. And I discussed this in my podcast recently, so I won't go into a huge amount of detail. But what we're talking about here is not really dynamic range. Dynamic range, it's actually quite a tough thing to pin down, but it's basically the difference between the quietest and the loudest sections in a piece of music. And as I'm about to show you, actually the loudness war hasn't damaged that nearly as much as you might think. The thing about it is that as an intuitive term, as a way of describing the problem to people, it absolutely works. So on the one hand, you know, it's kind of awkward having a name for an event and to be talking about something that's not really the thing that you're talking about. But you know, the TT Dynamic Range Meter, they came up with a name for that. And when I saw it, I just thought this is the great tool that will help people discover how this is affecting their music. And I didn't even think about the fact that the name wasn't technically sound at that point. I just went with it. And so, yeah, somebody asked me if would I do it again? And I think the answer is probably yes, because Well, I'll tell you what the alternative name for the day is in a minute. So if dynamic range, well, what does it mean when I say that dynamic range hasn't really been affected by the loudness war? To understand that, you need to know that recently I've talked more about dynamics. That's a deliberately vague term because dynamic range is not really technically correct. Dynamics still conveys the essence of what I'm trying to say, but actually dynamics is still too vague. What we really need to start thinking about is the difference between macro dynamics and micro dynamics. So microdynamics are microscope. It's the small stuff. It's the real detail. It's the transients. It's the drum hits. It's the strumming of the guitar. It's the details in the vocal line. You know, it's kind of instrument by instrument dynamics is the microdynamics. Whereas macrodynamics is the bigger, larger scale stuff. The contrast between the verse and the chorus. You know, the build and the drop. And I've created some graphics to hopefully help explain that. I've shamelessly ripped off these images from a blog post created by Ian Stewart, who I know is watching the call. Ian, maybe you could post the link to your blog post. He did a great blog post about dynamics in EDM and why dynamics in EDM are important. If you could post the link to that in the comments for this event so that people can take a look at that. If you also scroll down the Dynamic Range Day Facebook page timeline, I posted that, I think, either earlier today or yesterday, so you can see the post that way. I will now share hopefully the images with you. So this is an adaptation of Ian's graphic, which tries to demonstrate the difference between microdynamics and macrodynamics. So this is a graph of loudness, and as Ian suggests, it's like a piece of EDM. So imagine a kind of a big synth drone with a kind of consistent level, and then the drums spiking out above that. And maybe this is just a section where there's just a 4 to the floor kick. So those spikes in the loudness that you can see are the kick. And you can see that roughly speaking, the scale on this is about 5 dB per line in the graph. So the micro dynamics at the loudest section, difference between the top of the loudness and the average level, the general loudness level, during this loud section here is indicated by the red bracket, and I'm saying that's about 8 dBs. The graph is not entirely to scale, but you'll have to forgive me for that. I only finished it half an hour ago, so yeah, cut me some slack. Whereas in the quiet section over here on the left, the microdynamics are also 8 dBs. It's the same difference between the drone and the spikes in the waveform, the kick spikes. But as indicated by the blue bracket here, it's actually 14 dBs lower. So it's a lot quieter. That's actually bigger than you might typically find. I think I'm going to do a blog post or an infographic based on these images, and I think I will probably adjust it so there's less of a contrast, because that's probably bigger than you would find in most pieces of music, but it's going to help illustrate the point here. So the other thing you can see is that there's some headroom at the top here. Now, so this is clipping up the top. This is 0 dB because we're talking about loudness, not peak. So the peak levels are getting higher up, and the red zone kind of indicates the area where peak control is going to have to be used. Excuse me. So there's going to be some limiting and compression happening there, but there's plenty of headroom here. This loudness level is down here at kind of -8 at the loudest moments, and this is down at -10, -15, the overall loudness, even during the loud section of the music. So there's plenty of headroom, there's plenty of space. In fact, this recording is not utilizing the available headroom effectively. So let's move on and look at a second example. In this case, we have lifted the overall level of the music by about 3 dBs. And now we are using the overall amount of loudness space in the recording format more effectively. These loudness peaks are getting up here. There's an acceptable amount of compression and limiting happening to the peak level, but the loudness is under control. And we still have 8 dBs of microdynamics and 14 dBs of macro dynamics. So the large scale difference between, let's say this is the build and this is the drop in this piece of imaginary piece of EDM. The drop is a massive 14 dBs louder than the build. It's not a very musical piece of EDM. And that's not affected at all by turning the loudness up. Maybe there's a little bit of extra peak limiting for the peaks, but that's almost certainly benign. It's when we go further that things start to get interesting. The overall level difference here, from the original levels on the left here, we've now moved up to an overall level boost of 8 dBs. These kick spikes here are still unaffected. There's no need for any compression with them down there. But at the top end, during the loud section, we can see there's been some significant reduction in the size of the loudness spikes. The amount of, the peak to loudness ratio, in fact. It's the crest factor. It's the same thing that the TT meter measures. So on these two examples, we've got about DR8, even during the loudest sections of the music. When we get to this one, that's more like DR4, PSR4, the microdynamics of the music, those short-term instrumental variations in loudness have had to be reduced by compression and limiting. How that sounds, who knows? You've lost some punch and some impact. You can see down here we have 8 dBs of loudness space being used to create the thump in the kick drum. When we get to the loud sections, there's just less room for it because it's being pushed up against the maximum level of the format. But the macrodynamics have not been affected, and that's why it is true to say that the macrodynamics of music have not been hugely affected by the loudness war, because this is typical. This, I would say, is probably similar to, let's say, the Radiohead album that I mentioned earlier. If this one here on the right is James Blake, where we've got a perfect balance of loudness and dynamics, here this has been pushed too hard. So the loudest sections are being compromised in terms of the dynamics, and you might be hearing some, you're certainly going to be hearing some loss of punch and impact during that loud section there, and you might well be hearing some distortion, some pumping in the compressor. There could be some negative side effects to that, and that's what a lot of music is like. But the macrodynamics, the contrast there between the two sections of music, has not been affected. Now let's look at one final example. This is your true loudness war casualty. The level here has come up a whopping 18 dBs since the original example. And you can see that now there is dynamic range control being used on both the quiet section and the loud section. So both of them are having the amount of peak to loudness ratio, the DR rating, reduced, and the macrodynamics have been reduced because the music is being pushed up so hard against the ceiling. There's so much compression and limiting having to be used that there is a negative effect on the dynamics of both. Now, with this slightly unrealistic example of this big difference between the loud and the quiet sections of 14 dBs, maybe this example is not that realistic. It would be rare to take something that was very dynamic to start with and crush it that much in the attempt to make it loud. But actually, when we start to think that more typically the overall difference in loudness between a verse and a chorus in a song might only be 3 or 4 dBs, actually there is a lot of music as a result of the loudness wars that does look exactly like this, where the difference between the loud and the quiet sections was much lower to begin with, and it has been pushed up so hard. So here we've got the microdynamics down to 3 dBs. So that's a PSR rating of 3, DR3, that's Metallica Death Magnetic territory. And the overall difference, the macrodynamics of the large scale dynamics have also been compromised. And that's what you hear, this is what Kanye West and Metallica and Skrillex and all of these really heavily processed songs and artists are doing to their music. And for those songs, I think there definitely has been an impact on the macrodynamics. But I should also say, when the contrast is that small, probably it was built into the mixes beforehand. Probably it was a creative decision. In some ways, this kind of example on the left is more upsetting to me, because if they had given it that little bit of extra space, if they could have mastered it as if it was this example here on the right, as James Blake did, as Daft Punk did, as all of the albums that have been nominated for the award have done, they could all have sounded that good. And because loudness is managed online, on Spotify, on YouTube, on Pandora, and hopefully everywhere, if the streaming services pay attention to the petition that we've started. And if you haven't signed the petition yet, please head over to the Dynamic Rangeway website, look for the link that says petition, or you can go to dynamicrangeday.com/petition and sign that. We want to encourage the streaming services to implement loudness management in line with the AES recommendations, because that will create a genuinely level playing field so that all of us can make our music sound the way that we want it to sound creatively, rather than having to do it for technical reasons. There's I'm going to switch off the screen share now. There's a great section in that interview with James Blake where he explains that when he started mastering, as I did, it was all about optimizing the sound of the music, then figuring out how it should work dynamically, and the job was done. These days, it's getting to the point where you have to think about the loudness first, and it's a case of getting it as loud as the client is insisting it should be, or the artist thinks it needs to be, and then trying to make it sound good afterwards, which is completely backwards. The sound should come first, then the dynamics. The dynamics should follow naturally from the sound. So there you go. I hope that's interesting, helpful. I'll have the traditional Q&A at the end of the webcast. So if you've got any questions you want to follow up with me about macro and micro dynamics and the difference, I'll be happy to maybe talk about it some more and go into more detail. But now I think it's time, it's the moment you've all been waiting for, which is to announce the winners of the competition. So there are 25 prize winners this year. We had so many prizes. We had over $6,000 worth of prizes, which is fantastic. I'm not going to read out all of them here, but everybody who's won a prize will get an email soon notifying them. I could probably run through the rest of the names afterwards now I think about it, but I will read the names of the prize winners for the top, I guess 5 or 6 or 7 prizes. Starting with the FabFilter Pro C compressor. I'm a big fan of FabFilter's plugins, especially the L2 and the limiter plugin and the Pro Q2 EQ plugin. In particular, the interfaces for both of them are excellent, very, very flexible, very intuitive. I really like them. I haven't used the Pro C as much, but it's definitely something that I want to look into. And the winner of the Pro C2 compressor is Leanne Macrianor. It looks like I probably pronounced that wrong. Congratulations, Leanne. I hope you enjoy using the plugin. I can hear I've had a message. I'm just going to check that there's nothing technical that I need to attend to. Sigador says it's not called L2. I apologize. You're absolutely right. L2 is the Waves plugin. It is the Pro L plugin made by FabFilter. It's very good anyway. FabFilter is the name to remember. The next prize is a fantastic prize. It's the Mini K47 condenser mic made by Roswell Pro Audio. I haven't used these, but Joe Gilder, I think he's using it for doing his podcast recordings now. He's got one of these mics. They come from Roswell. Now, this is where I don't know enough about the people who are donating the prizes, because I believe Roswell also offer DIY kits for making replicas of classic gear. So you can build your own analog EQ module or your own mic pre's or in kit form for a fraction of the cost that they would cost that you would have to pay if you bought the real thing. And reports are that they sound extremely good. The K47 is the mini K47 is a recreation of a classic mic. I believe it might be a ribbon mic, but I might have that wrong. Anyway, it's a fantastic prize, and everyone should check out the Roswell Pro Audio site for their other products. And the winner of that prize is Reed Eby, or Ebby. It's worth watching this podcast just to this webcast just to see how I mangle people's names when I read them out. Next, we have the TC Electronic LM6N loudness radar meter. You've probably seen this if you've watched some of my YouTube videos. It's a fantastic, great-looking loudness meter. TC have been at the forefront of loudness research over the years, and they have supported Dynamic Range Day from the outset. I'm very, very grateful for their support. They make a whole range of loudness tools, analysis tools, processing tools. I use TC processing in my mastering. I used the System 6000 for years. I love their gear, love their products. A lot of it just has the edge sonically, I would have to say. So the winner of this prize, I think I recognize this name. It's Salaz L, which I think that might be a member of my Home Mastering Masterclass course. Certainly somebody who I've talked to online. I don't know what the L stands for, but congratulations. I hope you enjoy the TC loudness meter. Next, we have two bundles by Meter Plugs of my plugins, of Dynameter, which you saw the display of earlier, and my Perception plugin, which is an automatic AB loudness matched comparison tool so that you can quickly check the effect of your mastering processing. It compensates for sync. Of course, I would say they're fantastic plugins, and everyone should. In fact, I should tell you that Dynameter, to celebrate Dynamic Range Day, is on sale now. You can get Dynameter for, I think, a third off. Head over to meterplugs.com/dynameter-DND. I'm not sure whether that was a deliberate mistake in order to make sure that only Dynamic Range Day fans got to get in on the sale, or whether that was a typo. But if you're signed up to my newsletter, you'll already have had that link. But yeah, do head over. If you've been thinking of getting Dynameter, now is a great time to snag yourself a copy. The winners of these two bundles are Andy Pills and Ash Brooker. That's a double A, which it might be just Ash Brooker, and if it is, then I apologise, Mr. or Mrs. Brooker. Anyway, congratulations to you guys. I really hope you like the plugins, since my neck is on the line. Pro Tools Expert came in at the last minute. I was a guest on their podcast last week, and they've offered us 10 one-year passes to their premium platform, their premium video platform, where you get a mass of extra content. I mean, there's a huge amount of stuff on Pro Tools Expert for free. Pro Tools Expert, the premium platform, is even more. I'm not going to read out all of those names right now, but there are 10 of those passes to be given away. It's a fantastic prize. So thank you to the guys at Pro Tools Expert. New Gen Audio have supplied the next prize, the Loudness Toolkit 2, which includes, I think, a limiter, a loudness meter. It's a fantastic package. I'm also a big fan of the New Gen loudness meters. Of course, I'm a fan of the Meter Plugs loudness meter. But, you know, I think in this day and age, having a really good loudness package in terms of analysis, in terms of being able to process, is essential, so that you know you're achieving the best possible results you can, and especially with the new regulations to do with broadcasting. So that's a really valuable tool for somebody out there. And the winner of the Loudness Toolkit 2 by New Gen Audio is Travis Tharp. So congratulations, Travis. Next, we have the Cambridge Audio CNX Network Streamer. This looks like a really cool unit. It's a central hub, basically, for all of the audio in your house, in your studio where you live. You can have inputs from everywhere and stream it out pretty much anywhere as well. One of the key selling points of it is that it will broadcast that audio at the highest possible quality, uncompressed. Certainly 2496, possibly higher, I believe. So thank you to the guys at Cambridge for supplying this fantastic prize. All of these prizes are listed, of course, on the competition page on the Dynamic Range Day website. I do encourage you to head over there and have a look, follow the links, read up about the companies. They're all making fantastic products. I do recommend and do urge you to check them out. I'm very proud to have them as sponsors of Dynamic Range Day. And finally, I've said it before, I'll say it again. SSL were the first people to come in and offer a prize in a competition. They were basically the idea behind it. They're the second year of Dynamic Range Day. Every year they've contributed fantastic prizes. This year is no exception. There are 2 500 format modules available. One of them is a mic pre module, and the other one is a recreation of the amazing talkback compression sound. If you've ever heard In the Air Tonight by Phil Collins, the sound on the drums there was created by accident, so the legend goes, by somebody having their finger down on the talkback when the drums were coming through and the compression being added. So it's a very much a creative effect. I haven't used it. I imagine it's really very cool. So this is a great prize as well. And thank you again to SSL for your continuing support of Dynamic Range Day and for making such great audio gear to help people achieve great things with their audio. And the winner of the 500 format modules is Phil Lamont. So congratulations, Phil. Congratulations to all of the winners. I will call out the other winners in the list because I know some of you are here listening anxiously to find out if you've won. I might repeat some of the names. Let's see. So other winners include Jeff Fogel, Chris Fliss, Heidi Brown, Elizabeth Barnwell, Pauline Hill, Heli Hartikainen, Dave Chick. Dave Chick runs the Get Hatched Productions. Dave's a great engineer. He's a legendary audio podcaster. He's won a prize. I'm sorry, Dave, I can't tell you which prize you've won yet. Congratulations. I always like it when I get to give prizes to people I know. We have Ola Hedman here, Luciano Bonelli Vivas, David Broadberry, Oscar Holdorf, Lindsay Gillis, Alex Simeonides, Sebastian Gonzalez, Carl Adams. I know a Carl Adams as well. Maybe that's somebody else I know. Sally Hay and Sophie Osborne have all won prizes. And I should mention the other fantastic supporters. They will win prizes. They will either win one of the year-long passes to the Pro Tools Expert premium platform, or there is a lifetime membership of David Glenn and Warren Hewitt's Pro Mix Academy up for grabs. Lifetime membership. That's some serious value over the years. A bundle of Joe Gilder from Home Studio Corner's Understanding EQ and Understanding Compression products, which are excellent. There are 2 mix consultancies with UK producer Russell Cotier. He really knows his stuff and is passionate about dynamics. That's well worth having those prizes. There is a huge bundle from Audio Issues, our good friend Björgvin from Audio Issues, the Music Production Strategies and Recording and Mixing Strategies bundle. And Warren Hewitt has given us another prize, which is a lifetime membership to his Produce Like a Pro online community. And finally, how could I forget Lid Shaw, from, some of you may know him from Toybox Studios or from the Recording Studio Rockstars podcast, which is an excellent podcast. If you're not listening to it, I recommend you get out there. Is offering a mixed consultation as well. I think the mixed consultations are virtual, so they'll be done via Skype and or email rather than in-person consultations. But thank you so much to all of the supporters of Dynamic Range Day this year. We really appreciate it. And thank you to you for supporting Dynamic Range Day, for watching the webcast, for taking part in the competition, for helping spread the word, for signing the petition. Please, if you haven't signed the petition, go there now, dynamicrangeday.com/petition. This stuff doesn't stop. Please tell people about the podcast episode, themasteриngshow.com, so that they can hear that full interview with Matt Colton about the James Blake album. I really want to spread the word about this album because, looking back, Daft Punk, Random Access Memories, and Uptown Funk in particular, also Happy by Pharrell, all of those have been huge hits with great dynamics, and I do think they are causing a change in attitudes. You know, not only is the Drake album more dynamic than you might expect in that genre, so is the new Beyonce album. And, you know, it's 2 or 3 dBs quieter overall than releases from 2 or 3 years ago. I think this is a positive sign. I think the message is starting to get through. Chris Athens, who mastered the Drake album, told me that he didn't have to have a conversation with the clients about loudness. He took the loudest mixes, and those were his benchmark. He didn't make them any louder. Everything else was balanced relative to those, and the clients didn't complain. We know that James Blake spoke to, or Matt spoke to James Blake's management and talked to them about the loudness, and they accepted that it was safe to make music more dynamic. And, you know, all the reviews are saying how great it sounds, particularly complimenting the production, and part of that is the dynamics. So as I choose to be optimistic about this issue, otherwise I'd probably have to give up and go and live in a hole somewhere. But I think we're seeing some positive signs. I think, you know, things like Dynamic Range Day, things like Turn Me Up, things like the TT Meter and the Pleasurized Music Foundation are all helping. And I'm hopeful that we will see more and more great sounding music as time goes on. So please carry on spreading the word. And thank you again for being here, supporting the event, and for listening to music. So that's the end of the structured part of the webcast. Now we can have a Q&A. So I'm going to have to find some of your questions. Do I need to find the event? I have so many windows here open. If Ian and Sigurdur want to join back in, use the link I sent you to get back into the Hangout and help me out with spotting some good questions from people, that would be really helpful. Diego as well, if you've seen any during the time. Okay. Oh, I'll tell you what, I will paste the link for the offer on Dynameter into the comments of the event for anybody who's interested to check it out. There we go. I'm not seeing the link that I pasted. Oh, there it is. Okay, let me just test that that works. Yes, there you go. That's the special offer price for Dynameter. Let's look down for some questions. People saying thank you. You're very welcome. X Factor don't have prizes this good, says Colin. In fact, what I'll do now that we're in the Q&A section, I will post in the comments there a link so that if anybody would like to actually join the Hangout and chat to me, they can do so. Be aware that you will be live to the world if you do that. I've lost the event window again. Okay, here we go. Rick. Rick is the correct way to address C. Richard Walker Jones. That's great to know. Rick asks, what do I recommend as the ideal amount of headroom for a mix that is to be mastered? I've actually written a blog post on that topic, Rick, which I will paste into the links. I mean, the answer is it doesn't really matter providing it's not clipping. But actually there are several more kind of elements to discuss that might be a factor. And rather than go into them in detail here, I'll post the link for you. I'll just find it. Here we go. Paste that link in there. There's a dramatically unflattering still of me with my eyes closed when you go to the event page and haven't clicked play, but I shall have to, that's the way that it works. Let's scroll down and see what other questions we have. Colin says, one day music will be the same quality as it was 40 years ago and you'll be responsible for that, Ian. I don't think it's just me. I mean, thank you, Colin, but maybe I can arrange a new Concorde after that. Well, I'll do my best. Bring back Concorde Day. Let's scroll down and see. Sadly, it's not $6,000 for all the winners, no. The total prize fund is $6,000. Diego or Ian or Sigurdur, have you seen any questions that need answering? Did I hope that the presentation on macro and microdynamics worked. It's been a bit frantic here the last couple of days. I interviewed Matt yesterday. I was editing that interview this morning and then doing that at the point where I had planning to do the slides for the presentation. So I was literally putting the presentation together kind of minutes before the podcast went live, the webcast went live. So I hope it made sense.
Yeah.
Hi. Yes.
Angela is asking, does the dynameter plugin work in Reaper and Audacity?
It absolutely works in Reaper.
Yeah, I do.
It's
I use it.
Available in VST, AU, AAX formats. I'm pretty sure that Audacity supports VST plugins, so it should work in Audacity as well. Yes, to the best of my knowledge. Feel free to give it a try. If it doesn't, then we will either fix it or give you a refund. But it should work in any host that supports VST plugins. Hope that helps.
Then Richard.
Oh, you've frozen, Sigurdur. I didn't hear that. Can you repeat? I didn't hear what you said.
I just died at Richard.
Looks like I may have answered everybody's questions. Looks like we may not have many questions to answer.
There's Colin talking about if you got any clout with music mags, progressive rock will benefit from a DR of 12 plus, but none of the magazine or reviews ever seem to mention the problem.
I would get Alex from Metalfy on the case. I have no idea whether I have any clout with those magazines, to be honest. Every so often, I discover, well, when I was chatting to Matt, I kind of became aware halfway through that he has obviously read at least some of my blog posts, which is very flattering. So there are people out there who are listening to me. I mean, if people want to send me contact details, I can try and reach out to people who, at the magazines. I mean, I know the guys at Sound on Sound pretty well. I know a lot of the kind of in the music tech, like literally music tech magazine, resolution, magazine, audio media magazine, those kind of people. But that's an interesting point. I mean, I guess actually talking to reviewers could be a sensible thing to do, because one of the great things about Metal Fire as a website is that they do address issues of sound quality as well as music. So that kind of that's a great benefit for people who want to know about this kind of stuff. So yeah, maybe I should consider that. Michael says, why not let the audio player take care of compression entirely? It has lots of sensors that can compress according to the movement. This is something that often gets raised. I think my answer to it always is, if I'm working out the ideal compression for a song, I will spend upwards of an hour on the first song of an album, and then, anywhere between 15 minutes, half an hour, 45 minutes on subsequent songs, getting the right settings, the perfect settings for the music. I'm not convinced that that can be done automatically in a way that's satisfying. There is some dynamic range control built into DVD players, for example. It's pretty crude. It's pretty, it's like a sledgehammer. I mean, possibly that might be better in the listening environment of a car than losing the quiet sections during. But I don't believe that, I believe in this concept of the sweet spot. You need to be loud enough, but you don't want to be too loud. And if you're loud enough, the music will work in the car as well. And actually going even louder than that, reducing the microdynamics even further, I'm not sure that there's a really tangible benefit to that. Personally, that's so. I certainly wouldn't kind of dissuade anybody from trying to develop a system like that, and I'd be very interested to test it if they did. But I think I'm skeptical about the quality of the results that might get. There's one here from Mob Serenade. Guessing that's not your real name. Hi Ian, if using a VU meter and setting the 0 point to -10, I should be seeing a value of -8 LUFS short range and DR8 on the dynameter at the same time. Yes, this is the recommended loudness sweet spot. It is for the loudest sections. So actually, the best way, I think, to measure this stuff is using either the TT meter or dynameter, because I've found over the years that the peak to loudness ratio, the difference between the peak and the loudness of the music, is the most reliable indicator of quality. When you think back to those graphs, the 3 graphs I showed you of those 3 albums, Radiohead and Drake both measure -10 LUFS, integrated loudness, over the whole album. So they both measure the same overall loudness, but the Radiohead is noticeably more crushed. And I don't think it sounds as good as a result of that. And that distinction you notice when you look at the PSR value, like the DR value, the crest factor, and you don't notice just by looking at the raw loudness figures. But yes, if you have your VU meter calibrated to -10, if you're not peaking above -1, which is what I recommend, then you're going to get RMS levels around about -10. You're going to get LUFS levels around about -10, peaking +1, +2 above that for the loudest sections. So the minimum peak to loudness ratio, PSR value, is going to be about 8. And in my opinion, if you go below 8 in any genre, you're going to get problems. I mean, that's one of the interesting things. I keep hearing people say, oh, the loudness is dependent on genre. I guess maybe the overall or the average loudness is dependent on genre, in the sense that, if you have a piece of folk music, a lot of the time it will be quiet. But when it gets to the loud sections, I think the same restriction applies. If you push folk music below PSR 8, the sound quality is going to suffer. If you push EDM and hard rock below PSR 8 at the loudest sections, it's going to suffer. The difference is EDM and hard rock might be that loud pretty much the whole way through an album, whereas a folk album might only get that, kind of 2 or 3 points each song. So basically the answer is yes, Mob. But I would recommend you look into either the TT meter or dynameter definitely as well. Because, you know, this is the thing. I mean, I genuinely mean, I'm going to do a video for Dynameter, the title of which is Dynameter is not a loudness meter. And it's not a loudness meter because loudness meters are going to be useless in future, because the loudness gets changed. YouTube changes the loudness. Apple Soundcheck changes the loudness. Pandora changes the loudness. Tidal is soon going to offer loudness management, so they're going to change the loudness. So if the loudness is going to be changed, why worry about it? What you need to do is optimize the dynamics to get the best possible results, regardless of how loud it eventually gets played. And that's the great benefit. That's what all of this loudness management means, that we will be able to do. Johannes, I get lots of mixes where the verse is nice and dynamic, but the chorus is squashed. Do you have a trick up your sleeve how to address that when a remix isn't possible? If the chorus is already squashed, Johannes, then you've got a problem, because it's very difficult to unsquash things. That's the problem, as you know, with the whole loudness swap thing. I think this is where we need to start talking about the difference between micro and macro dynamics. If the micro dynamics are crushed, there's nothing much you can do except request a new mix at a lower level. Sometimes you also see the macro dynamics being messed up. And typically, you know, you can have something where actually the verse sounds a bit louder than the chorus because there's so much extra dynamics processing that comes in during the chorus. That you can address in mastering, and that's the same strategy that I would suggest, where perhaps when you're mastering something, maybe if you have more dynamics to begin with, if you set the verse up so that it sounds great, by the time you get to the chorus, you end up adding too much compression and limiting at the mastering stage. The fix in both of those situations is to just ease the level back before the dynamics control, before the compression and before the limiting, which I do using automation. What's interesting about that is that often, even though you've pulled because the dynamics processing is coming in later, excuse me for knocking the mic, you don't necessarily hear the music get any quieter. So I might take the level of a chorus back by 2 or 3 dBs as it hits the compressor. It doesn't sound quieter at the other end, because what happens is less compression happens, you get some microdynamics back, it has more punch, it works musically in relation to the verse, which was quieter to begin with, or should have been quieter in the case where somebody's giving you something where the dynamics are messed up. Yeah, and you can get a better result. So, you know, you can't rescue those microdynamics, but you can manage the macrodynamics to get the best result out of them. And, you know, if you've got something that's been overly squashed, sometimes you can add a little bit of EQ to get some extra thump back into the low end, a little bit of extra clarity in the high end. Those kind of things can help give the impression that there's more dynamics, even when something has been heavily crushed beforehand. But, you know, really, there's no substitute for asking for a new mix. I hope that answers your question. Okay, that name is in, I believe, Greek, so I can't possibly pronounce it, but, Belarus, beg your pardon. Question about the DR meter plugin. There was a link for downloading it for free, but there's no Mac version. Is there any Mac version? There is a Mac version. So you're talking about the TT meter. The TT meter actually has never been free. It is, but it isn't. There's a post on my website that tells you everything you need to know about it. Which I will post into the comments. You need to be what they call an active member of the Pleasurized Music Foundation's website, which I think costs about €30. Once you're signed up as an active member, then you can download all the versions of the TT meter for free. But you should be aware that it's only a 32-bit plugin. It's pretty old now. Excuse me. So you may find it doesn't work as well in modern DAWs. And if it does work, you may find that the performance is a bit sluggish. That's one of the reasons that I developed Dynameter, was just I felt there was a demand for something similar that worked in more modern DAWs. So I've posted that link now. Take a look. I hope that will help. Rick says, we both know David Earl, aka SF Logic Ninja. I might have mastered some of his stuff. I'll be honest, if I did, I probably I master so much stuff, I forget. But yeah, David is a great guy. Russell says he can't wait to hear the full-length interview. It's a great interview. You know, and what was so great about it, you can't tell in the excerpts that I had today, but the reason he was on his phone is that he has a 4-month-old baby daughter who was asleep on his chest while he was doing that interview, and then wakes up halfway through and starts chatting to us, which is very, very cute. So you'll hear some of that in the full-length interview as well. It's a great interview. There's loads there that people are going to enjoy. Mob Serenade says, my real name is Scott, and thanks, that answered the question. You're welcome. My pleasure. Colin says, I noticed the damage below 8. The odd track can be louder, but it's rare. To some extent, it's a degree of taste. You know, 8, 10, you know, 8 is my own personal threshold. It's something degree of how long is a piece of string. Michael asks, I like to listen to the most dynamic releases of any CD and often spend time researching for my favourite albums, often older ones like Pink Floyd or the Eagles or Beatles. How come I can't easily buy or stream older versions of a CD? I mean, that's a really good question, but you're going to have to ask the record companies about that. There's this obsession with remastering and replacing all the previous versions with, I mean, I think, you know, it makes sense. The idea is the remastered version should be the best version, and often they are better in lots of ways. The remastered version of Nevermind is less dynamic than the original, which I think is a shame, but I would say overall the EQ is more satisfying for a heavy genre like that. You know, so I think that's why. I think it's the idea that the new version should be the best version, and you know, it's just unfortunate that, especially right now, that's often not the case. So yeah, I mean, what I would say, I think you need to be. I'm slightly cautious about it's not the case that more dynamic is always better. Just as an example, I was doing some research recently, and I thought I had found the original CD master of Thriller. Turns out I hadn't. Somebody sent me the original CD release of Thriller, which is kind of got an extra couple of dB of headroom, and I listened to it, and I kind of thought maybe that could do a little bit of compression. You know, something that happened in the early days of CDs was that kind of old masters were transferred flat without EQ and compression that might have been used for vinyl. The thinking being that would be the best way to release the files, you know, the raw mixed tapes. But actually, you know, a lot of that processing that happened at the cut, the original vinyl cut, was beneficial. And when you compare the sound of the original vinyl with the sound of the master tapes, there's often quite a big difference. So I think, you know, I've always said I'm not completely anti-compression, completely anti-limiting, and it's not the case that more dynamic is always better. It's all about balance for me. And I think the risk, if you go for those really early releases, excuse me, there was one guy who wanted to use all of the original CD releases of the Beatles material, which I think is, you know, just doesn't make sense to me. The most recent remasters of the Beatles, for me, are the best that stuff has ever sounded. They're kind of textbook demonstrations of how great remastering should be done. Yes, some of them have lost a point or two of the measured dynamic DR, PSR rating, the crest factor. But I challenge anybody to actually, I think those are technical. That's where the numbers start to take away from just listening to the music and listening to the sound. So, you know, I would just urge caution when you go for those really early versions. Sometimes it might be better in terms of the measured dynamics, but it may not be as good in other ways. For example, it may have been made with early converters that don't sound as good as modern digital converters. That's just one example. Russell says it might be worth mentioning relaxation/chill out music that is intended to be quiet, but has a low crest factor, a low DR rating. In the past, I've dropped the WAVs for a CD up to 16 dBs to allow the user's volume control to get the playback at a relaxing level. I think that's a good point. You know, I mean, that's something that you need to be careful with when you're measuring dynamic range. If you compare the the crest factor, the peak to loudness ratio of a flute with a gunshot. The gunshot naturally has a massive peak to loudness ratio, and the flute naturally has a very low peak to loudness ratio. So you shouldn't, if you have a piece of music that has something like a flute sound in it, you know, sustained, say, mellotron on a flute setting, or a, you know, a synth pad, anything that kind of long sustained sounds, you may see very low measurements on the TT meter, on dynameter. That doesn't necessarily mean there's a problem. And if you have 6, 8, 10 dBs of peak headroom in your mix, that doesn't mean you should crank it automatically right up to the maximum. You know, I think we have to use musical judgment with these things. So yeah, that's a fair point, Russell. Raphael asks, are there substantial differences between the TT meter and the LRA measurement of an EBU R128 meter, a modern LUFS loudness meter? The answer to that is yes, there are big differences. LRA is not the same as DR. DR is effectively crest factor, peak to loudness ratio, which is what dynameter measures. LRA is loudness range. It tries to estimate the overall, LRA tries to estimate macro dynamics, whereas the TT meter measures microdynamics. You know, so if you have you could have a folk song that kind of, you know, just kind of rumbles along at the same level all the way through, and it would have a very low LRA. And you could have a metal song that has some very loud sections that are extremely distorted and right up there, and then some quiet sections that would have a much bigger LRA. So yeah, LRA doesn't tell you the same thing. If you want an R128 version of the TT meter, dynameter is my recommendation, of course. But I mean, you can infer the peak to loudness ratio from any loudness meter. You know, if you know that your music is peaking at -1 and the short-term loudness is hovering around about -10, then the peak to loudness ratio is about 9 dBs. You can figure that stuff out. I happen to like, I find it intuitive the way that the TT meter and dynameter display the information. But you can figure that stuff out from a loudness meter, but it's not LRA. Interesting. Andy's just asked a question about mastering ambient music that naturally has a low crest factor, low PSR rating. And what do I recommend? Because it automatically has a low dynamic range. Don't worry about it. You know, same thing applies. People kind of contact me and say, "Oh, I'm doing EDM and it has very limited dynamics to start with," and I kind of go, "Well, are you using lots of compression and limiting and clipping?" And they say, "No, that's just the way the sounds come out of the box." In that case, you know, don't worry about it. I mean, there's a blog post I did with some ideas of ways that you can add dynamics to EDM. Maybe I can post that in there for you. But yeah, if the music that you're recording, mixing naturally has limited microdynamics or even limited macrodynamics, you know, I mean, pretty much every full-on metal tune that you've ever heard of has limited macrodynamics because it's all loud all the way through. That's okay. That's not a problem. That's the way that it sounds. That's the way it's meant to sound. But if you then remove all the microdynamics, that's when you might have a problem. There's the EDM Dynamics link. I've pasted that in. Rick asks whether it would be possible to create kind of new compressors using digital technology that can achieve the kind of reductions in dynamic range without any of the negative impacts. In theory, that's possible. In practice, I don't think I've seen it. And there is one product that I've used. It's Paul Frindle's DSM plugin. I think that's the right name for it. That actually is capable of achieving some really quite extraordinary reductions in crest factor / dynamic range without a lot of the negative side effects. I don't find it that musically useful. I actually quite like a little bit of pumping. If I'm using compression, I probably want to hear some of the effects of that compression, some of the traditional effects. I think, those classic bits of analog gear were made with great focus on musicality and usefulness originally. So I think people emulate them for a good reason on the whole. So yeah, I think theoretically what you're saying is possible. In practice, I haven't seen it yet. Johannes, what do you think of the fact that some of the major mastering houses deliver masters with lots of intersample peaks because they either push the limiter or squash the signal into the AD just to be loud? I think it's debatable how much ISPs are audible, and it depends how big they are. I mean, there's some major releases out there that peak up to +3, so meaning 3 dBs of clipping probably when it gets played back. I think it's crazy. I don't understand why they do it. I suspect some of them don't know, some of them don't care. It's baffling. I mean, to be honest, it's baffling to me that anybody would master. I understand it, I mean, Bob Ludwig, who mastered the Radiohead album, I know for a fact that he offers all his clients multiple versions of the masters, and he hopes that they will choose the more dynamic one. Sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. And when they don't, the loud one is the one that gets released, even though he's as passionate about dynamics as the rest of us. So, and that's a perfectly understandable way of working. I have a different approach. I respectfully suggest that people should go somewhere else because I just don't enjoy doing that kind of work. So I guess, the answer is they need to make a living. That's why it happens. And we're not there yet. James Blake is the exception. Not everybody is as enlightened. Unfortunately. So I'm seeing less questions now. People saying thanks. It's midnight here in the UK. My voice is starting to go. I think it's been a great evening. Thank you so much for your support, for your great questions. Thanks for joining me here. And I'm going to call it an evening. Please keep spreading the word, especially about the petition. The more signatures we can get for that petition, I think the better. It can only be a good thing if we can show that there is support for this idea of consistent loudness management across the streaming platforms. And I think that's going to become more and more significant as time goes on. I think it's already having an effect. And I hope that we'll see more of the benefits of that in future. So, thanks again, everybody. Thanks for listening.